Before we get started, I have a quick request for you. I'm really trying to reach 1,000 subscribers. Hitting that goal would mean the world to me. If you could hit that subscribe button, that single click gives me huge motivation to keep making videos for you. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Ruin them all. The cardboard box weighs more than her pride ever did. Adaria Duvernay walks down the marble steps of Rathbone Capital, her career folded neatly into a box. A framed photograph, a withered succulent, 3 years of 18-hour days reduced to something she can carry in one arm. Behind her, the security guard reaches for the glass doors. They lock with a heavy click. 3 years inside that building, and she wasn't even trusted to walk back in. The laughter starts before she reaches the bottom step. Min-seo doesn't bother lowering her voice. Hyun-woo Guan points, as if she's a punchline. Sang-hoon leans into the joke, as if it's the best thing that's happened to him all quarter. 3 executives, dressed like they own the sky, celebrating on the steps of a company that isn't theirs. Not really. Solaria doesn't turn around. She lifts her phone, dials one number, and presses it to her ear, as if it's the only thing left that still belongs to her. Jae-hoon, sue to buy the company. A pause, then his voice, low and unbothered, as if she'd just asked him to pick up dinner. And after that, she looks back just once, watches Min-seo's mouth still open in laughter, watches Hyun-woo's finger still pointed at her spine like a verdict. Ruin every single one of them. She hangs up before he can answer. She doesn't need to hear it. She already knows it's done. 3 weeks earlier, Galeria Duvernay was simply the best-kept secret in corporate finance. Not because she was hiding money, but because she was hiding a husband. To her colleagues, she was the quiet senior analyst who never took the corner office, never name-dropped, never let anyone see the black car that dropped her 2 blocks from the building every morning. The only thing her coworkers never knew was that every night she went home to a man powerful enough that ministers returned his calls before answering their own families. She hadn't married into his world to use it. She'd married into it and locked the door behind her, determined to build something that was hers alone. A reputation earned, not bought. It was the one thing about her life she refused to let him touch. She should have known that pride has a price. And at Rathbone, the bill was about to come due, dressed up as an audit, signed by people who thought silence made her weak. They thought they had fired an employee. They had just declared war on the wrong man's wife. The apartment on the 41st floor didn't look like it belonged to a man who could move markets before breakfast. No marble, no gold, just glass, quiet gray stone, and a view of the city that made everything below look small and slow-moving. Galeria loved that about it. She loved that Gyeong-suk never once tried to fill it with the kind of noise other rich men mistook for taste. She'd wake up at 5:40, always, before the alarm, before the sun had fully decided what kind of day it wanted to be. And most mornings he'd already be up, standing at the window in a plain gray Henley, holding 2 cups of coffee like it was the only ritual that mattered to him. He never asked about her work, not because he didn't care, but because he understood something most husbands never figure out. The version of her he loved wasn't the wife of Jae-on Suk-baek. It was Galeria Duvernay, senior analyst, sharp enough to catch a rounding error 3 departments could miss. She wanted to be that woman, not an extension of him, not a name people whispered about at galas. Oh, you know who she's married to. She wanted her badge to open doors because of what was in her head, not because of what was in his bank accounts. So every morning, she kissed him at the door, got into a plain black sedan 2 blocks from the building, never his car, never his driver near the office, and walked into Rathbone Capital like any other woman climbing the ladder 1 merciless rung at a time. That separation, that wall she built between her 2 lives, it was about to become the most dangerous thing she ever did. Because the less people at Rathbone knew about who she really was, the easier it became for 3 very greedy, very desperate people to think she was an easy target. Rathbone Capital ran like a machine built entirely out of ego. Corner offices lined the top floor like trophies. Everyone smiled with their teeth and stabbed with their eyes. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Zyleria had built a reputation as the one person in the building who didn't play games. She didn't gossip. She didn't posture in meetings. She just worked. Quietly, precisely. The kind of employee who made everyone else look a little lazy just by existing. Which is exactly why, on a random Tuesday morning, her director dropped a file on her desk with a tired sigh and said the 4 words that would change everything. Legacy accounts. Full audit. Nobody wanted this assignment. It was the audit equivalent of cleaning out a garage nobody's touched in a decade. Old accounts, dead subsidiaries, half-digitized paperwork from before half the current staff even worked there. Boring. Tedious. The kind of task you hand to someone when you don't expect them to actually find anything. Axelaria didn't mind. She liked things other people found boring. Numbers didn't lie to her. Numbers didn't smile in her face during a meeting and then talk about her the second she left the room. So she dove in. 3 days of spreadsheets. 3 days of matching wire transfers to shell subsidiaries with names so forgettable you'd forget them the second you read them. And then, on day 4, something didn't sit right. A transfer. Small. Almost invisible. Routed through an account that was supposed to have been closed 2 years ago. She almost scrolled past it. Almost. But something in her, that same instinct that made her double-check everything twice, made her stop, made her go back. And when she pulled the thread, the whole thing started to unravel. Because that closed account wasn't closed at all. It was active. Quietly active. Feeding small, irregular payments into an offshore holding company registered under a name that meant absolutely nothing. Until she cross-referenced the signing authority. Min-seo Che, her supervisor. Now, if this were just Min-seo skimming a little off the top, that would be bad enough. Corporate embezzlement. Career ending. The kind of thing that gets someone fired and maybe prosecuted. But it wasn't just Min-seo. The deeper Axelaria dug, quietly, carefully, telling absolutely no one. The more names started stacking up. Hyun-woo Gwan's signature on approval documents that should have required 3 levels of sign-off he never had. Sang-hoon Pyo's fingerprints all over wire authorizations dressed up as consulting fees. Millions, not hundreds of thousands. Millions, bleeding out of the company through a pipeline so carefully disguised that anyone less obsessive than Zalaria would have walked right past it. She sat there at 11:15 at night, alone in the office, staring at a spreadsheet that could end 3 very powerful careers. She didn't know it yet, but she had just become the biggest threat in the building, and someone had already noticed. Min-seo Che didn't build a career out of being careless. She noticed things, small things. The way Zalaria had been quieter than usual for the past week. The way she'd started staying late, really late, long after the rest of the floor had cleared out. The way, twice now, Min-seo had walked past her desk and caught her closing a window just a little too fast. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Then she checked the system logs and her stomach dropped straight through the floor. Because there it was, time-stamped, undeniable. Zalaria Duverne had been inside the legacy accounts. Not just inside them, deep inside them. Pulling records that hadn't been touched in years. Cross-referencing wire transfers that were never, ever supposed to be cross-referenced by anyone with functioning eyes and half a brain. Min-seo didn't panic in front of anyone. That wasn't her style. She smiled through the rest of the day like nothing was wrong. She laughed at the right jokes in the 4 o'clock meeting. She even complimented someone's new haircut, but the second the office cleared out, she made 3 phone calls. One to Hyun-woo, one to Sang-hoon, and one to a private meeting room on the 31st floor. The one that wasn't in use, according to the booking calendar, which was exactly why she picked it. They met at 9 p.m. No assistants, no calendar invite. Just 3 people who'd spent the last 2 years quietly stealing from a company that trusted them completely. Now sitting in the dark, staring at each other like animals, that just heard the trap click shut somewhere nearby. She knows, Min-jun said flatly. No greeting, no warm-up. Just the words that made the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. Knows what, exactly? Say it plain. She's been in the legacy accounts all week. I checked the logs myself. Sang-hoon let out a slow breath, dragging a hand down his face. So she's seen the transfers? She's seen enough, Min-jun snapped. Give her 3 more days and she'll have all of it. Every account, every signature. She'll walk it straight to compliance, and we will all go to prison. Do you understand that? Not fired prison. Silence. The kind that presses down on your chest. They didn't sit there and think about turning themselves in. They didn't think about coming clean, about damage control, about doing the one decent thing that might have saved them from what came next. No, they started thinking about how to get rid of her. She's careful, Hyun-woo said slowly, thinking out loud. Too careful. If we try to fire her outright with what she has, she'll go straight to the board, or worse, straight to the authorities before we can even get her out of the building. So we don't wait for her to make the first move, Min-jun said, voice cold and calm now, the panic replaced by something far more dangerous. Calculation. We make it look like she did this. All of it. Sang-hoon looked up. You want to frame her? For our own scheme? I want, Min-jun said slowly, leaning forward, to make it so airtight, so undeniable, that by the time she opens her mouth to say a single word in her own defense, nobody in that building will believe her. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Hyun-woo reached into his bag and pulled out something small, a cloned access badge. Sang-hoon produced a tablet, already pulled up to a digital signature replication tool, the kind of software that shouldn't exist inside a legitimate financial firm, but absolutely does if you know the right people. They'd been preparing quietly for weeks, just in case. Now it was time to use it. They spent the next 2 hours planning every detail, every timestamp, every access log they'd need to fake, every trail they'd need to plant. Across the city, completely unaware, Solaria was closing her laptop, satisfied with the progress she'd made, thinking she had time. She didn't. Midnight has a particular kind of stillness in a corporate building. The cleaning crews have gone, the security guards are half asleep behind their monitors, and the only sound left is the low hum of servers running quietly in a room nobody thinks about. That's exactly when they moved. Hyun-woo used the cloned badge to access the 22nd floor at 12:04 a.m., Solaria's floor. The cameras caught it, of course. Cameras always catch something. But that was the point, because with the badge cloned, the system didn't log his face. It logged hers. He sat down at her terminal. Her actual desk, her actual chair, still faintly smelling like the same coffee she'd been drinking for 3 years straight, and using access credentials Sang-hoon had spent the past week quietly harvesting. A keystroke logger here, a software update prompt there. He logged into her account. Not as a guest, not as an administrator override, as her. From that point on, every single action on the screen would carry her digital fingerprint, her badge number, her IP address, her login timestamp. He accessed the wire transfer system. 5 accounts, 5 distinct shell destinations. The precise offshore network Min-seo had been quietly cultivating for 2 years, except this time it was orchestrated to resemble a single, coordinated theft. One individual, acting alone, siphoning $5 million from the firm in one reckless night. He didn't flinch. His fingers danced with practiced speed and precision. Transfer 1, approved. Transfer 2, approved. By the time he initiated the 5th transfer, a faint sheen of sweat slicked his palms. Not from guilt, but from adrenaline. From the sheer, unadulterated audacity of their endeavor. $5 million, rerouted, buried beneath a paper trail so meticulously crafted, it would require a forensic team weeks just to begin questioning its integrity. And by then, Solaria would be long gone. Dismissed, discredited, barred from defending herself from the very building she once called her workplace. At 12:41 a.m., he logged out, meticulously erasing his physical presence from the room as best he could, slipped the cloned badge back into his coat pocket, and walked out as if nothing had transpired. 3 miles away, Solaria slept, truly slept, the first unbroken night's rest she'd experienced in nearly a week. She had no inkling that while she slumbered beside her husband, blissfully unaware, her entire career was being systematically, deliberately, and surgically dismantled. She would awaken in 6 hours to discover her world had already imploded. The email arrived at 8:52 a.m. Please report to HR, Garrick Thorne's office, immediately. Solaria read it twice, a familiar knot of unease tightening in her stomach, before her mind could even grasp the reason. HR summons at 8:52 a.m., before most people had even had their first cup of coffee, were hardly routine. She knew that. Every denizen of corporate America knew that. She reassured herself it was likely about the audit. Perhaps they desired a progress update. Maybe someone had finally recognized her quiet diligence and wanted to formally involve compliance. She was wrong. Devastatingly, irrevocably wrong. Garrick Thorne's office exuded a peculiar chill, a sterile ambiance only HR departments seemed to master. Beige walls, a lone box of tissues placed with an almost deliberate prominence on the desk's edge, as if anticipating the need before the meeting even commenced. Garrick remained seated as she entered, offered no coffee, no small human courtesies that typically soften the blow of difficult news. He simply slid a folder across the desk. "Sit down, Miss Duvernay." She complied, slowly, her gaze already darting to the upside-down folder, attempting to decipher its contents before he uttered a word. "We have a serious problem," Garrick stated, his voice devoid of emotion, rehearsed. "Last night, at approximately 12:04 a.m., Your credentials were used to initiate 5 separate wire transfers, totaling $5 million, routed to unregistered offshore accounts. The room seemed to recede into a muffled quietude in her ears, as if submerged beneath water. I wasn't in the building at midnight, she managed, her voice remarkably steady despite the icy dread creeping up her spine. I was home. You can verify that. We've already reviewed the security footage, Garrick interjected, sliding a printed still frame onto the desk. Grainy, dim, a figure at her desk, hood obscuring their face, back to the camera, impossible to identify definitively, but positioned in a way that rendered denial futile before she'd even spoken. My badge, my login, my terminal. That's not me. Her voice gained a slight edge, her composure beginning to fray. Anyone can see that's not. The digital signature matches your credentials precisely, he countered, presenting another page. Down to the biometric login on your specific device. She stared at the page, at the numbers and timestamps that made absolutely no sense, because she knew. She knew with every fiber of her being that she had been home, asleep beside her husband at that exact moment. But knowing something and proving it in a room stacked against you from the outset are two profoundly different realities. I want a lawyer in this room, she declared. Right now, before this conversation proceeds any further. Garrick's expression remained impassive. That won't be necessary. This is an internal termination proceeding, not a legal one. You are welcome to seek counsel afterward. That's not how this works, she retorted. And for the first time, genuine fear began to seep into her voice. Not the fear of losing her job, but the terror of witnessing, in real time, how effortlessly those with sufficient power could simply obliterate someone. I have the right to representation before you make any decision that affects Ms. Duvernay. His voice sharpened, cutting her off entirely. The evidence is conclusive. The firm has zero tolerance for financial misconduct at any level. Effective immediately, your employment with Rathbone Capital is terminated. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. She sat there for a moment that felt stretched into an eternity. 3 years. 3 years of 18-hour days, of catching errors no one else spotted, of building a reputation so impeccable, so meticulous, that she genuinely believed it would shield her if ever put to the test. It offered no protection whatsoever. You're making a mistake, she said quietly, rising on legs that felt distant and unsteady. A grave mistake. Garrick didn't even look up from his paperwork. Security will meet you at your desk. She walked out of that office with her spine erect and her face a mask of perfect, dangerous calm, because the last thing she intended to grant any of them was the satisfaction of witnessing her unravel. A security guard was already stationed by her cubicle when she arrived. Hands clasped in front of him, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder, anywhere but on her face. She offered no words. She simply began to pack. The framed photograph of her and Jae-suk from a trip to Jeju, the one she always kept angled slightly away from the aisle to deflect questions. Her plant, the one she'd miraculously kept alive through 3 grueling budget seasons. A drawer brimming with pens no one else would ever miss. Word travels with astonishing speed in an office. By the time she'd emptied her second drawer, she could feel it. The palpable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations faltered mid-sentence as she passed. Eyes flickered toward her, then away, swiftly, as if prolonged observation might somehow render her misfortune contagious. And then there was Linnea. Linnea Boyd, the quiet analyst from the floor below whom Celeria had mentored, not through formal designation, but by simply answering her questions with unfailing honesty when others wouldn't. Lingering an extra 5 minutes to explain a complex model instead of brushing her off. Linnea appeared at the edge of the cubicle partition, arms crossed as if hugging herself, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she'd already absorbed the grim news and refused to believe a single word. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper, casting a quick glance over her shoulder, to ensure Garrick's office door remained shut. I know you didn't do this. That was it. 4 words. But Celeria felt a subtle loosening in her chest. Just enough to draw a breath for the first time since 8:52 that morning. Thank you, Celeria whispered back, her gratitude more profound than Linnea could ever comprehend. The security guard cleared his throat gently, almost apologetically, as if even he sensed the profound wrongness of the entire situation. Celeria picked up her box, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the elevator, carrying 3 years of her life in a cardboard container that suddenly felt heavier than anything she had ever lifted. Behind her, near the top of the stairwell leading down to the main lobby, Min-seo, Hyun-woo, and Sang-hoon were already waiting, observing, barely concealing their satisfaction. The elevator doors opened, she stepped inside, and as they slid shut behind her, silencing the office din, she caught one last glimpse of their faces, already smiling, already reveling in a victory they believed was theirs before the battle had even truly begun. The lobby doors opened onto the marble steps. A security guard trailed 2 paces behind her the entire way, silent, almost apologetic. She stepped through the glass doors onto the topmost step, and behind her the doors locked with a decisive click. 3 years within that building, and she wasn't even entrusted with the simple act of walking back out. The cardboard box weighed more than her pride ever had. Salaria Duvernay descended the marble steps of Rathbone Capital, her career compressed into a box, a framed photograph, a wilting succulent, 3 years of 18-hour days reduced to something she could carry in one arm. Behind her, the laughter erupted. Min-seo made no attempt to lower her voice. Hyun-woo pointed as if she were a punchline. Sang-hoon reveled in the jest as if it were the highlight of his quarter. 3 executives, dressed as if they owned the world, celebrating on the steps of a company that wasn't truly theirs. Salaria didn't turn around. She lifted her phone, dialed a single number, and pressed it to her ear, as if it were the last possession that still belonged to her. Jae-on, buy the company. A pause. Then his voice, low and unperturbed, as if she'd merely asked him to pick up dinner. And after that, she glanced back, just once. She watched Min-seo's mouth still agape in laughter. She saw Hyun-woo's finger still pointed at her spine like a pronouncement. Ruin every single one of them. She hung up before he could respond. She didn't need to hear it. She already knew it was done. And here's what none of them comprehended, standing there on those steps, basking in their perceived triumph. They believed they had just witnessed a woman lose everything. What they had actually done was awaken something formidable. Because 40 minutes later, in a conference room on the 41st floor of a building none of them had ever heard of, Jae-on set down his phone, regarded the 3 individuals already seated at his table, and uttered a single sentence that initiated the countdown on all that was to follow. Get me everything on Rathbone Capital tonight. If you thought the story concluded with her walking down those steps, stay with me. Because that was merely the opening gambit. What unfolds over the next 2 weeks is the part for which no one at that firm was remotely prepared. Jae-on did not govern his empire with fury. That was the initial misconception held by those who had heard whispers but had never actually sat across from him. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he had no need to. He operated in silence, and it is in silence that empires crumble. By 10 o'clock that night, 3 of his senior directors were gathered around a private table, laptops aglow, their faces illuminated by the cool blue light in the darkness. No raised voices, no histrionics, merely a quiet, methodical dissection of Rathbone Capital's very being. Its board structure, its investors, its vulnerabilities, its weaknesses, and weaknesses, they had plenty. They're leveraged, one of the directors stated, scrolling through data, heavily. Institutional investors are already apprehensive about their fourth quarter figures. It wouldn't take much to tip them. Gyeong-suk leaned back slightly. Then let's not push them all at once. What transpired over the subsequent 7 days was so discreet, so surgically precise, that not a single individual within Rathbone Capital recognized its unfolding until it was irrevocably too late to intervene. It began subtly. A financial journalist, the kind with an impeccable reputation and a luxurious apartment funded by highly discreet sources, published a brief article questioning unusual irregularities in a mid-tier asset firm's legacy account structure. No names were mentioned, no accusations were leveled, merely a question mark hanging in the air, the kind that unnerves institutional investors without ever explicitly stating anything untoward. Then came the second piece, a different publication, a different perspective. This one alluded, almost in passing, to Rathbone Capital having recently terminated a senior analyst under circumstances that some insiders described as opaque. By day 3, a private wealth management group, one that had quietly funneled money into Rathbone for over a decade, placed a call to their internal legal team asking a single pointed question: should we be concerned? Nobody at Rathbone knew where the rumors were coming from. That was the terrifying part. There was no single source to trace, no smoking gun, no name attached to any of it, just a slow rising tide of doubt seeping into every conversation institutional investors were having about the firm behind closed doors. Min-seo felt it first. She always did. She had a nose for panic, mostly because she'd spent 2 years quietly generating some of her own. By Thursday afternoon, she was fielding nervous calls from two major clients asking why their statements looked different this cycle. By Friday, a third client had frozen further investment pending internal review. She told herself it was coincidence. She told herself markets were always a little jumpy this time of year. She was wrong. And deep down, some small, cold part of her already knew it. Because rumors like this, the kind that spread without a source, without a face, without anything you can sue or silence, those don't happen by accident. Somebody was building something, slowly, deliberately, brick by brick. And Zalaria, 3 miles away in that quiet apartment on the 41st floor, wasn't lifting a single finger. She didn't need to. This part of the story, this is where it stops being personal and starts being surgical. It's what happens to their stock price next week is going to feel like watching a building collapse in slow motion. By the following Monday, the whispers had done exactly what whispers are designed to do. They'd planted doubt. And doubt in financial markets is far more dangerous than any single bad headline. That's when Jae-on made his second move. He didn't do it loudly. He didn't do it all at once. Across a network of financial branches spanning 3 continents, entities that on paper had absolutely nothing to do with each other, let alone with him, a coordinated short position began quietly building against Rathbone Capital stock. Tuesday morning, Rathbone stock dipped 2%. Nothing alarming. Markets dip. By Wednesday, it had dropped another 4%. By Thursday, the drop had accelerated to nearly 9% in a single trading day. And that's when the financial press, the same outlets that had been quietly seeded with those early irregularities stories, started connecting dots publicly. Headlines that had been vague a week earlier suddenly had teeth. Rathbone Capital faces mounting scrutiny amid investor exodus. Inside the building, it was chaos disguised as composure. Min-seo sat in her office with the door locked, watching the stock ticker crawl downward in real time. Her hands pressed flat against her desk, like she could somehow stop the numbers through sheer force of will. Her phone buzzed constantly. Clients, board members, journalists requesting comment. She answered none of them. Down the hall, Hyun-woo was on in third phone call of the morning, voice climbing steadily higher with every sentence. I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I don't have an explanation. Nobody has an explanation. Sang-hoon, for his part, had stopped answering his phone entirely. He sat in his office with the blinds drawn, staring at a spreadsheet that used to represent his entire net worth, watching it shrink by the hour. By Friday afternoon, Rathbone Capital stock had fallen 31% in 5 trading days. Institutional investors weren't just hesitating anymore. They were pulling out entirely, scrambling to cut losses before the bleeding got worse. 2 major pension funds withdrew their positions within hours of each other. A credit rating agency quietly downgraded the firm's outlook from stable to negative. And still, nobody inside that building understood what was actually happening to them. They thought this was bad luck, a perfect storm, bad press meeting bad timing, meeting a nervous market. They had absolutely no idea they were watching a single calculated hand slowly close around their throat. Because here's the part that should genuinely scare you if you're paying attention. Everything that had happened so far, the rumors, the leaks, the stock crash, none of it was even the real move. It was bait. And by Friday night, exhausted, terrified, and completely out of options, the board of Rathbone Capital did exactly what Jae-hoon had spent an entire week engineering them to do. They started looking for a lifeline. If you think the panic in that building was bad this week, stay with me. Because what happens in that boardroom next is where 3 very powerful people are about to make the single worst decision of their entire lives. The offer arrived on Saturday morning, routed through an intermediary law firm with a name so generic it barely registered. The kind of firm that exists specifically so nobody can trace who's actually behind it. An anonymous offshore fund willing to inject emergency capital, willing to stabilize the stock, willing to save the company from what was looking, by every measure, like total collapse within the next 2 weeks. To the board of Rathbone Capital, sitting in an emergency session that had been called with barely 6 hours' notice, it looked exactly like what they desperately needed it to look like. A miracle. They had no idea it was a leash. The emergency shareholder meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp, in the largest conference room the firm had. The one usually reserved for annual reports and holiday parties. Now repurposed for something that felt a lot more like a funeral, the room was packed. Board members, major shareholders, legal counsel scribbling frantically in the margins of documents nobody had time to properly read. The energy in that room wasn't professional. It was desperate. The particular kind of desperate that makes smart people agree to things they'd never agree to on a normal Tuesday. Min-seo sat near the front, dressed immaculately as always, but there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Hyun-woo kept checking his phone under the table, jaw clenched. Sang-hoon hadn't said a word since he walked in. The CFO stood at the front of the room, voice unsteady. Without this capital injection, we are looking at insolvency proceedings within 10 to 14 business days. This offer represents our most viable path forward. A hand went up. One of the older shareholders, a man who'd been with the firm since it was 3 people in a rented office. And who exactly is behind this offer? We're being asked to hand over significant equity to an entity nobody in this room can name. The lawyer at the podium adjusted his glasses. The buyer has requested confidentiality until the transaction closes. This is not unusual in situations of this nature. It was unusual. Everyone in that room knew it was unusual. But desperation has a way of making unusual feel acceptable, especially when the alternative is watching your entire net worth evaporate within 2 weeks. The vote was called at 10:47 that morning. Hands went up around the room, one after another. People voting to save the very company that a mysterious, faceless offer was about to take completely out of their hands. Min-jun's hand went up. Hyun-woo's went up right after. Sang-hoon hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before his did too. They thought they were surviving. They had absolutely no idea they were signing away the last thing standing between them and complete total ruin. Because that anonymous offshore fund, the one nobody in that room could name, they were about to meet him in person. Because the moment that vote passed, the doors at the back of the conference room were already starting to open. Don't look away for even a second, because what walks through those doors next is going to change absolutely everything. The doors didn't slam. They didn't need to. They simply opened, wide, deliberate, unhurried. And the room went quiet in a way that boardrooms rarely go quiet, because the energy that walked through those doors made every single person in that room instinctively understand that something had just shifted permanently. 2 men in dark suits entered first. Security. Not the building security, their own. They positioned themselves calmly on either side of the door, hands folded, expressions unreadable. Then Jae-on walked in. He didn't rush. He didn't need to rush. He moved through that room the way water moves through a canyon, slow, inevitable, carving through anything in its path without even seeming to try. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, nothing about his appearance particularly loud or aggressive. He didn't have to be loud. The silence he carried into that room was louder than anything Min-seo, Hyun-woo, or Sang-hoon could have manufactured in their worst nightmares. And then, one step behind him, Solaria walked in. Gone was the corporate blazer. Gone was the careful, deliberate plainness she'd worn for 3 years, to make sure nobody looked twice at her. She wore deep midnight silk, sharp and commanding, her hair pulled back with a precision that made her look less like the woman who'd been walked out building 2 weeks ago, and more like exactly what she'd been hiding the entire time. Someone in the front row gasped audibly. Min-seo's face went the color of the walls. "What?" Hyun-woo started, half rising from his seat before his legs seemed to remember they didn't actually work right now. "What is this?" Jae-on reached the front of the room and set a single folder down on the podium with a quiet, deliberate click. "My name," he said, voice calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted, "is Gyeong-suk. 3 weeks ago, this firm terminated my wife based on fabricated evidence manufactured by 3 of your senior executives to conceal their own embezzlement scheme." The room didn't just go quiet, it went still, the kind of stillness that happens right before something breaks. "The anonymous offer your board just voted to accept," he continued, "was mine. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I own 62% of Rathbone Capital, controlling interest." Behind him, the doors opened again, and this time it wasn't security. Federal agents walked in, calm and methodical, fanning out along the back wall with the kind of quiet authority that made 3 particular executives feel every ounce of blood drain out of their faces at once. "I'd also like to introduce," Gyeong-suk said, gesturing slightly towards Solaria, "the new chairwoman of this company." Solaria stepped forward, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she let herself look directly at Min-seo. Not with rage, not with triumph, with something far colder. The calm, patient look of someone who had waited exactly long enough. "Let's talk about the forensic audit," she said, voice steady, "that traced your offshore accounts, Min-seo, back to a payment network currently under federal investigation for laundering funds tied to an organized syndicate operating out of the Eastern Port District." Min-seo's mouth opened, nothing came out. "You weren't just stealing from this company," Solaria continued. "You were funneling money to people who do not forgive mistakes. And by framing me, by dragging my name through the exact kind of scrutiny that brings federal auditors sniffing around every account you've ever touched. You didn't just risk your job. She let the silence stretch, just slightly. The same way she had on those marble steps 2 weeks earlier. You just told a rival criminal network exactly where to find the person who's been quietly stealing from them for 2 years. The color that drained from Min-seo's face wasn't fear of prison anymore. It was something much older, much more primal. The specific terror of realizing you've made an enemy far more dangerous than the one standing in front of you. Hyun-woo turned toward the exit instinctively, the way people do when their body understands danger before their brain fully processes it. One of the federal agents stepped forward, calm, unhurried. "Mr. Gwon, we have some questions for you." Sang-hoon didn't even try to run. He just sat there, staring at the table, the fight completely gone out of him. If you thought watching them panic during the stock crash was satisfying, stay right here, because what happens to these three over the next hour is the part everyone in that room is going to be talking about for years. It took less than 90 minutes to dismantle 2 years of carefully hidden corruption. Federal agents escorted Min-seo, Hyun-woo, and Sang-hoon out of the building separately, deliberately separately, so none of them could coordinate a single word of their story before questioning began. Their corporate cards were frozen before they reached the lobby. Their offices were sealed by end of day. Every asset, every account, every offshore holding traced back to their names was frozen pending a full federal investigation. Garrick Thorne, the HR director who denied Zalaris representation and terminated her without so much as a real hearing, was placed on immediate administrative leave once internal counsel discovered just how thin the evidence against her had actually been. Evidence he'd accepted without question because questioning it would have meant slowing down a decision 3 very powerful executives clearly wanted made quickly. By that evening, the story had already broken publicly. Financial news outlets that had spent the past week speculating about unusual irregularities at Rathbone Capital suddenly had their actual headline, "Hostile Takeover Exposes Massive Embezzlement Scheme, Ties to Organized Crime Network." Rathbone's stock, which had cratered 31% the week before, began climbing back within days once the market understood the firm hadn't been collapsing from mismanagement. It had been bleeding out from theft, and the theft had just been surgically removed. Solaria spent that first week as chairwoman doing something nobody in that building expected. She didn't fire people wholesale. She didn't purge the office in a fit of righteous fury, even though every single person in that room would have understood if she had. She ordered a full independent audit spanning 4 years. Not to punish, but to find out exactly how deep the rot had gone, and exactly who else had been quietly harmed by it along the way. What she found broke her heart a little, honestly. Analysts who'd been passed over for promotions that were secretly handed to Min-seo's allies, whistleblower complaints that had been quietly buried years before Solaria ever discovered the pipeline herself. A culture cultivated over years where staying quiet was the only way to survive. She compensated every employee who'd been sidelined or mistreated under the old regime, some of them going back 3 years. Quiet settlements, real apologies, the kind of accountability that doesn't make headlines but changes actual lives. And then there was Linnea. Solaria called her into the new corner office on a Thursday afternoon, the same office that used to belong to a man who'd once looked her dead in the eye and refused her a lawyer. Linnea walked in nervously, clearly expecting nothing good, the way people do when they've spent years working somewhere that trained them to expect the worst. "I'm restructuring the analytics division," Solaria said, sliding a folder across the desk. The same gesture Garrick Thorne had once used to end her career, now being used to build someone else's up. "I need someone to run it. Someone who actually knows what integrity looks like in this building, because most people here forgot a long time ago." Linnea stared at the folder like it might disappear if she blinked. "You're offering me the department." "I'm offering you the department," Solaria confirmed, "because you're the only person in this entire company who looked me in the eye while I was packing a box and told me the truth when it would have been so much easier to look away." Linnea's eyes went glassy. "I just said 4 words. 4 words that mattered more than you'll ever know," Solaria said quietly. That Friday evening, 6 weeks after she'd walked down those marble steps carrying nothing but a box and a phone call that changed everything, Solaria walked back out through the front doors of Rathbone Capital. Except this time, there was no security guard walking 2 paces behind her, no locked glass doors, no laughter echoing off the stone steps. Gyeong-suk was waiting for her at the bottom, hands in his pockets, watching her the way he always did, like she was the only interesting thing happening anywhere in the world. She reached him, slipped her hand into his, and for a moment, they just stood there, looking up at a building that had once tried to erase her completely, and now bore her name on the top floor instead. Regrets? He asked quietly. She thought about it, really thought about it. The humiliation on those steps, the locked doors, the cold beige office where a man who didn't know her at all decided her entire future in under 10 minutes. None, she said finally. They thought they were getting rid of a problem. She looked up at him, something fierce and satisfied settling behind her eyes. They just handed the entire company to the last person on earth they should have ever underestimated. They walked away from that building together, hand in hand, disappearing into a city that had absolutely no idea what quiet, patient power actually looked like, until it decided to stop being quiet. And somewhere behind them, 4 floors up, a new chairwoman's office sat empty for the weekend, waiting for Monday morning, waiting for the next chapter of an empire being rebuilt, one honest decision at a time. His laughter started before she reached the bottom step.